My name is Sophia Montgomery. I'm 33 years old, and I built a life my family loved to brag about when it made them look good. But they hated it when it reminded them I didn't need them anymore. By the time this happened, I had spent over 10 years working my way up in Chicago. I closed big real estate deals. I survived on coffee and late nights. Pure stubbornness kept me going, until I could finally buy the one thing that felt completely mine. A lakefront house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I didn't inherit it. Nobody gave it to me. I earned every single dollar. And apparently, that's exactly why they thought they could take it from me. It started at my brother's wedding. 300 guests filled the ballroom. Everyone dressed like they were at the event of the year. Everyone pretending our family was as perfect as the flowers on the tables. I barely sat down before my parents cornered me. They had that tight smile people wear when they're about to ask for something crazy. And they still expect you to say thank you. What they wanted that night wasn't money. It wasn't a favor. It wasn't even a loan. They wanted my lakefront house as a wedding gift for my brother and his new wife. Because according to them, a married couple needed it more than a woman living alone. When I said no, the whispers got nasty. The pressure went public. And my father decided humiliation would work better than guilt. A second later, champagne was running down my face, in front of everyone. Then the room went completely silent. And that should have been the worst part of the night. It wasn't. Because a woman at table 9 slowly stood up. She looked straight at my family, and she changed everything. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me something. Where are you listening from right now? And how does the vibe feel where you are? Calm, tense, somewhere in between? I'm curious. I followed my parents to a quiet corner near the back of the ballroom, the kind of spot reserved for private conversations, except nothing's ever really private at family events. My father, Thomas Montgomery, already had that look on his face, the one he uses when he's decided he's right, before anyone else even speaks. My mother, Catherine, stood next to him. She had this smile that looked painful to hold. My brother Marcus and his new wife Lauren walked over a few seconds later. Both of them still glowing from the ceremony, both of them way too comfortable, for people about to ask me for something insane. My father didn't waste time. "Sophia, let's keep this simple," he said. "Marcus and Lauren need a real place to start their life. Your house is perfect for them." I stared at him, honestly waiting for the punchline. Instead, my mother grabbed my hand, like this was some sweet family moment. And she said, "You're established, sweetheart. You're secure. You can build another life anywhere, but they need a strong start." I looked from one face to the next, hoping someone would break, hoping someone would admit this was a joke. Nobody did. My brother gave me this tight little shrug. He said, "We'd never ask if it wasn't important," Lauren added softly, like that made it reasonable. It would mean everything to us. That's when I realized this wasn't spontaneous. This had been discussed. Long before I even arrived. This was a coordinated attack, wrapped in wedding flowers and family language. I laughed once, because I genuinely didn't know what else to do. "You want my lakefront house as a wedding gift?" My father nodded, like I'd finally caught up. "It makes sense, Sophia. You live alone. They're starting a family," I said. "I bought that house with my own money. I oversaw the renovation myself for 2 years. I pay every single bill, every tax, every insurance payment, every maintenance cost." My mother's smile got tighter. "And no one's taking that away from you. We're just asking you to be generous." My father corrected her right away. "No, we're asking her to do what family does." Marcus stepped closer. He lowered his voice, like that made him less shameless. Sophia, you know I'm not where you are yet. The market's been rough. Business has been okay, but not enough for a place like that. It would change everything for us. I looked at him, and I felt something in me go cold. You're 29 years old. You're married. You're standing at your own wedding. And you're asking your sister to hand over a multi-million-dollar house because it would be convenient for you. Lauren's face changed. It's not about convenience. It's about priorities, I repeated. Priorities. My mother jumped in. You always do this. You make everything sound ugly. When someone asks you to care about people more than things, that line would have hit harder. If I hadn't spent the last 10 years quietly helping all of them, whenever something went wrong. I covered a shortfall in one of my father's projects. When a financing partner backed out, I wrote a check when Marcus couldn't afford his lease. I paid for medical equipment for my mother's aunt, without telling anyone, because her dignity mattered. Not once did I bring those things up. Not once did they thank me. In any way that lasted. But now suddenly I was selfish, because I wouldn't give away the one thing that was mine. I said, I've helped this family more times than any of you will admit. My father waved his hand, like he was swatting a fly. Money here and there isn't the same as making a real sacrifice. That almost made me laugh again. My mother leaned in closer. She lowered her voice. Sophia, listen to yourself. A house is just a house. A marriage is a future. And there it was, the logic I grew up with. My goals were temporary. My brother's needs were sacred. My accomplishments didn't matter. His milestones were untouchable. I said, no, I'm not giving Marcus my house. I'm not trading it. I'm not co-owning it. I'm not helping with a mortgage on something similar. No. Marcus's face got hard. You really want to do this tonight? I answered. You're the one doing this tonight. My father's jaw clenched. Don't be dramatic. We're trying to keep this respectful. Respectful? He said that, while standing at his son's wedding, demanding my property, like it had been sitting in the family vault, waiting for him to hand it to the better child. My mother said, It's one house, Sophia. One. And if it means your brother and his wife can start right, why is that too much? I looked straight at her, and I said, because it's mine. For a second, nobody spoke. The music floated in from the ballroom, glasses clinked, someone laughed across the room, but at our table, the temperature dropped. My father took one step toward me, and he said, Then maybe you should explain that answer in front of everyone, since you seem so proud of it. We walked back toward the center of the reception, with all the tension of people holding lit matches near gasoline. At first, I thought maybe they'd let it go. Maybe they just wanted one last chance to pressure me. Before dinner started, I was wrong. My father stopped next to our table, still holding his champagne, and he spoke just loud enough that the nearest guest turned to listen. Sophia refuses to help her own brother. He said it like he was delivering tragic news, instead of performing manipulation in a tuxedo. My mother joined right in. She won't even consider giving them the lakefront house. Imagine being that attached to square footage. I felt heads turning all over the room. The smile froze on Lauren's face. Marcus looked embarrassed for about 2 seconds. Then he decided it was safer to let our parents keep going. That told me everything. I said, Since we're doing this in public, let's be accurate. You're asking me to give away a house I bought with my own money because you think my life matters less than his. My father snapped, Don't twist this into some political speech. This is about family obligation. My mother said, A woman alone doesn't need a lakefront house, more than a married couple trying to build a life. There were murmurs now. People were listening, really listening. My brother finally spoke. Sophia, nobody said your life matters less, but you have options. We don't. I looked at him, and I said, you have 2 working adults, no kids, and a wedding that probably cost more than most people make in a year. Don't tell me you don't have options. Lauren's expression cracked right then. She said, you always make people feel small when you want to win. I almost admired the timing. It was the perfect line. If you wanted to go from entitled to victim, I said no. I make people uncomfortable when I say the quiet part out loud. My father stepped so close. I could smell the champagne on his breath. You've always confused success with being better than everyone. That house should go to people who'll use it properly. I said, properly? What does that even mean? He answered without hesitating. It means people who understand family, legacy, what actually matters. And there it was again. In his mind, I wasn't a daughter who built something. I was a temporary holder of family property that he could hand out whenever he felt like it. My mother looked around at the guests who were now openly staring, and she said, Sophia, please don't embarrass us like this. I said, I'm embarrassing you? Not the part where you demanded my house at your son's wedding? My father's voice got sharp. Enough. You'll stop being selfish and do the right thing. I felt something strange then. Not fear, not even anger. More like clarity. The kind that shows up when things get so absurd, you can finally see them without hope getting in the way. I said very calmly, I won't give Marcus my house. Not now. Not later. Not because you pressure me. Not because you shame me. Not because you think being my parents gives you the right to reassign my life. For half a second, the room seemed to pause with me. Then my mother said, How can you be this cold? My father lifted his glass. His hand was already shaking. And then, because guilt had failed, because control was slipping, because 300 people were watching him lose, he did the one thing that would define the rest of his life. He threw the champagne straight at my face. It hit hard enough to sting. Cold liquid splashed across my cheek, my hair, the front of my dress. There was a gasp. So sharp it felt like the whole room inhaled at once. The band stopped playing. Mid-note. Somewhere behind me, silverware hit a plate. Marcus stood frozen. Lauren looked horrified, but not horrified enough to step toward me. Nobody moved at first. My father was breathing hard, like he hadn't expected his own body to go that far. My mother whispered, Thomas. But it was too late for warnings. Champagne was dripping onto the floor, beneath my heels. My vision blurred for a second, not from tears, from shock. I raised one hand, wiped my eye, and looked at my father through stained fingers. He actually had the nerve to say, Maybe now you'll understand what public shame feels like. And that's when the silence shifted. It changed shape. It stopped being stunned and became watchful. A chair scraped the floor from somewhere to my left. Then a woman's voice rang out, clear, controlled, impossible to ignore. No, Mr. Montgomery, I think everyone here understands exactly what public shame looks like now. Every head in the room turned toward table 9. The woman standing there was Judge Rebecca Fontaine, one of the most respected civil judges in Illinois. Silver hair, perfect posture, visibly unimpressed. She set down her napkin, looked directly at my father, and said, I've watched enough. No parent is entitled to bully an adult child into giving up private property. What happened here was coercion, followed by humiliation, and every person in this room just witnessed it. The room changed instantly, not because people suddenly found their conscience, but because someone with credibility had spoken the truth out loud. A man near the dance floor lowered his phone, only to raise it again, from a better angle. Someone at another table muttered, "Unbelievable." My father opened his mouth, but Judge Fontaine cut him off before a sound came out. "If you're tempted to call this a private matter, don't. You made it public, the moment you used an audience to force obedience." I stood there, with champagne on my face, and I felt the balance of the night shift. I grabbed a napkin from the nearest table, pressed it against my cheek. The stain spread fast, wet against white. And somehow that tiny detail grounded me, more than anything else. My father looked stunned, not at what he'd done, but at the fact that someone had challenged him. My mother's face had gone pale. Marcus kept glancing between the judge and the guests, already understanding that the story leaving this room wasn't going to be the one he wanted. Attached to his wedding photos, Lauren folded her arms around herself, like she'd just realized she wasn't standing inside a luxury fantasy. She was standing inside my family's real character. Judge Fontaine stayed where she was, calm, unflinching. She didn't raise her voice again. She didn't need to. The authority was already there. Guests started whispering to each other. Others stopped pretending not to stare. I noticed at least 6 phones, aimed in our direction. My mother tried first. "Sophia, sweetheart, I'll take a breath. This has gotten emotional." I looked at her, and I said, "Emotional? That's what you're calling this?" My father barked. "Don't start acting like a victim." I actually smiled at that. Small and sharp. You threw champagne in my face. Because I wouldn't hand over my house, I don't need to act like anything. My brother finally found his voice. "Sophia, maybe we can just talk somewhere private." I turned to him. "Private? You were comfortable enough staying silent while they demanded my house in front of half the guest list. You don't get to ask for privacy now." He flinched, and I knew I'd hit the truth. The reason Marcus stayed quiet was simple. Silence was profitable for him. My mother stepped in again, this time sounding more urgent than graceful. No one demanded anything. We were asking for support. Family support. I said, "Support is helping someone who respects your boundaries." This was pressure. This was entitlement. This was all of you deciding. That because I built something valuable, it could be handed to the son. A few people nearby heard that, and they shifted uncomfortably. Good. Let them. I was done protecting people from the ugliness of what they were doing. I looked around the room, then back at my family. For 10 years I worked, while the rest of you treated my success like a convenient resource. When there was a gap, I filled it. When there was a mess, I helped clean it up. When one of you needed money, advice, connections, or damage control, I showed up. And every single time, it was called love when I gave, and selfishness when I stopped. My mother's eyes flashed. "That's not fair." I ignored her. I paid for my own graduate program. I worked 80-hour weeks, when I was barely sleeping. I spent 2 years overseeing that house renovation. I signed every contract. I negotiated every permit issue. I stood in ankle-deep water during a storm, making sure the place was protected, because I cared that much. Not one of you offered help. When it was hard, but now that it's beautiful, now that it represents success, suddenly it belongs in the family. My father said, "You're making a scene." I answered, "No. You already made the scene. I'm just telling the truth inside it." Judge Fontaine took one step forward, and she said, "Ms. Montgomery is correct. Boundaries aren't cruelty. Ownership isn't selfishness. And adulthood doesn't disappear. just because parents don't like a decision. I could feel the room shifting, guest by guest, table by table. The story my parents tried to control was gone. This wasn't about an ungrateful daughter anymore. It was about a woman being publicly cornered for refusing to give up what was hers. My mother looked around, and she realized it too. She lowered her voice and hissed, "Sophia, stop talking, please." That single word told me everything. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry, just stop. Stop making us look like what we are." I said quietly, "No." My voice carried further than I expected. "I'm done apologizing for what I've earned. I'm done being treated like family only when I'm useful. And I'm done letting any of you decide that my life is less valid because I'm not married." There was a silence after that, more powerful than the first one. It wasn't shock anymore, it was judgment. I could see it on the faces around us. A woman near the front table shook her head at my father. One of Lauren's friends looked down, embarrassed. Two older men who'd probably known my father for years suddenly seemed fascinated by their water glasses. My brother tried one last time. "Sophia, you know I never wanted this to happen," I said. "Then you should have stopped it." Before the champagne left his hand, he had no answer. Of course he didn't. I took a breath, set the stained napkin down, and I said, "I'm leaving now. I won't argue. I won't negotiate. I won't revisit this next week. After everyone decides enough time has passed, the house is mine. That discussion is over." My father muttered something about ingratitude under his breath, but it sounded weaker now, like even he could hear how pathetic it was. Judge Fontaine nodded at me once, a gesture of respect that somehow meant more than all the approval I'd chased from my family growing up. I nodded back. Then I turned, lifted my chin, and walked through the center of the ballroom, with champagne drying on my skin, and 300 people watching me leave, with more dignity than the people who'd tried to take it from me. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone was already buzzing. First one message, then 5, then a flood. A former client, a college friend, a woman I barely knew. Writing, "You handled that with more grace than they deserved." Outside in the cool evening air, I finally checked my screen. Someone had recorded the whole thing, from the side of the dance floor. The video was less than a minute long. My mother talking, my father throwing the champagne, the gasp. Then Judge Fontaine standing. That was all it took. At first, it spread the way these things do, inside the event. Guests shared it in group chats. A bridesmaid posted it on her private story, with a shocked caption. A vendor sent it to a friend. Then someone uploaded a clean version, without names, and within hours, people were identifying the family. I didn't need to say a word. The truth moved faster than any spin could. By midnight, people in Lake Geneva circles were talking about a father who tried to shame his daughter into giving up her house at a wedding. By morning, the names were out. My father's business contacts recognized him. My mother's social circle recognized her. People in real estate knew Marcus. Someone identified the judge. After that, the story went wide. I got home, showered, changed, and sat on my couch with sparkling water, because even the sight of champagne made me sick. My phone kept lighting up. Some messages were supportive. Some were angry for me. Some were from women I hadn't talked to in years, who'd lived through versions of the same thing. The successful daughter, expected to carry every burden, the reliable child, treated like family property. Those messages mattered more than I expected. They reminded me. This was bigger than one wedding. Around 1 a.m, Judge Fontaine texted me. You handled yourself with exceptional restraint. Don't let anyone convince you that you were wrong for saying no." I stared at that message for a long time. It felt like someone had finally named what I'd known for years, but never said clearly enough. Meanwhile, the wedding I'd walked out of was falling apart. One guest texted me. "They're fighting upstairs," another said. "Marcus is blaming your parents. Lauren is blaming him." The after-party was canceled before sunrise. The fallout became real the next afternoon. One of my father's longtime clients emailed, asking if the video was real, and if his firm should be concerned, about Thomas Montgomery's judgment under pressure. Then another client requested a call. Then a developer paused a meeting. Nobody said the quiet part out loud, but everyone understood. People with money don't like instability, and they hate public humiliation even more. My mother's losses came through silence. She was removed from a charity committee. A lunch invitation disappeared. A woman she called a close friend stopped replying. Her entire identity had been built on being admired, tasteful, polished. The video showed something else. A woman standing next to cruelty and calling it family duty. My brother and Lauren got hit too. Their wedding photos started going around, next to the story, and strangers immediately asked the obvious question: if two adults were mature enough for a luxury wedding, why were they trying to take a house from his sister? Some people defended them at first. That ended fast, once the video spread further. Marcus never stepped in. Lauren never said stop. They weren't innocent. They were beneficiaries. By the second day, the pressure between them turned ugly. Marcus was furious that his wedding had become public humiliation. Lauren was furious that he'd let his parents hijack the reception. He blamed her for pushing too hard. She blamed him for hiding behind his family. It wasn't a new problem. It was the truth finally showing. I kept waiting for guilt to hit me. It never did. Sadness showed up. Disbelief did too. But not guilt, because I hadn't created this. I'd refused an outrageous demand. They'd handled the rest, in front of witnesses. That evening, my mother left me a voicemail. Her voice was shaking. "Sophia, please call us. This has gone too far. Your father is upset. Marcus is devastated. People are being cruel online. We need to fix this as a family." I listened twice, just to be sure. She never once asked if I was okay. The next week felt strange, in the best possible way. My phone was still full, but now the messages felt steady, not chaotic. A mentor from early in my career told me she was proud of me for holding the line. A real estate executive I respected wrote that she'd watched women get punished for boundaries her entire career, and she hoped I knew how many people were on my side. Even strangers sent painfully honest messages about being the daughter expected to carry everything because competence gets mistaken for unlimited capacity. Those notes mattered. They reminded me this wasn't just my story. It was a pattern. A lot of people knew too well. My father called 3 times in one day. I ignored the first 2 and answered the third. He didn't start with an apology. He started with outrage. "Do you have any idea what this has done to us?" I said, "Yes, I think I do." He exhaled sharply. A client postponed a contract over a family incident that had nothing to do with business. I said, "Throwing champagne in your daughter's face in public says a lot about business judgment, actually." He went quiet, then changed direction. "You could stop this if you wanted. One statement, one interview, one post saying we're resolving things privately." There it was. Not remorse. Reputation management. I said, "I'm not cleaning this up for you." He used my name, the way he had when I was younger, and he wanted obedience, not conversation. "Sophia, enough. Families move on, I said. Real families apologize first. He hung up. My mother tried the softer version the next day. She cried. She said my father had lost control. She said Marcus's marriage was already struggling. She said people were being unfair and cruel. When I asked if she remembered what she'd said to me, before the champagne hit my face, she went silent. Then she said, "We all said things in the moment." I answered, "That's exactly the problem. You still think this is about a moment. It's about a pattern. Years of treating my success like shared family property, and my boundaries like betrayal." She asked if we could meet privately, just mother and daughter. I told her no. I said I wouldn't participate in a conversation designed to make everyone comfortable, without requiring anyone to change. She cried harder, but what I felt wasn't cruelty. It was relief. Marcus reached out last, and somehow that hurt most, not because he was angry, but because he sounded small. He asked for a private call. I agreed. He started by saying, "I didn't think Dad would actually do that." I said, "But you thought I might actually give you my house." He let out a long breath. "Sophia, I know how bad that sounds." I said, "Then say the true thing instead." He was quiet for a few seconds, before finally saying, "I thought you could absorb the loss, better than I could absorb not getting it." Hearing him say it made the whole family logic click into place. This had never been about fairness. It was about assuming I could take the hit, because I always had before. I said, "Thank you for finally saying it honestly." He tried to explain. He said Lauren had always imagined a certain kind of life. He said the wedding costs got out of control. He said our parents kept insisting the house made sense, because I split my time anyway. Then he said something that told me his marriage was already sliding. Lauren keeps asking why I didn't shut it down earlier. I said, "Because you didn't want to lose the possibility of getting what you wanted." He didn't deny it. A few days later, Judge Fontaine sent me another message. "You don't owe reconciliation to people who are only apologizing because the room saw them clearly." I saved it, not because I needed permission, but because sometimes the right sentence arrives at exactly the right moment. Over the next month, bits of news reached me, through other people. My father had gotten defensive and volatile at work. My mother insisted the internet had twisted everything. Marcus openly blamed them for ruining his wedding, Lauren apparently said. She hadn't signed up to marry into a family where humiliation was a strategy. Nobody seemed interested in the deeper question of why they'd all felt entitled to my house in the first place. That part almost made me laugh, even with everything collapsing. They still wanted the story to be about consequences, not causes. I never went public. I didn't do interviews, didn't write statements, didn't post captions about healing. My silence became its own answer. They wanted me to help restore the image they'd destroyed. I chose not to. For once, that choice didn't make me feel lonely. It made me feel free. 6 months later, the damage had settled into something quieter, more permanent. My father's company still existed, but not the way it had before. One waterfront project got delayed indefinitely after investors raised concerns about leadership volatility. A longtime client moved a contract elsewhere. Another deal just never came back. After being paused, my father kept saying business was cyclical, and maybe some of that was true, but public behavior changes how people read private character. The video hadn't ruined him by itself. It had just shown people a side of him they could no longer unsee. My mother's losses were social, not financial, which for her made them just as painful. She was quietly removed from 2 charity committees, A lunch invitation vanished. Friends who once loved being seen next to her at events started keeping their distance. No one announced her fall. In those circles, they never do. They just stop opening the same doors. Marcus's marriage lasted 4 months. That didn't surprise me, though the speed did. From what I heard, the fights never stopped. After the wedding, first it was the video, then the blame, then money, then the deeper issue underneath it all. Lauren realized. She'd married a man who let his parents define reality, until the cost became too public to ignore. Marcus realized. She loved the image of a polished life, more than the truth of the family she'd married into. The marriage ended the same way it began, with fantasy colliding with character. As for me, I kept the house, not out of stubbornness, out of truth. It was mine before that night, mine during it, and mine after it. But the house changed for me, in one important way. For years it had represented security I'd earned through hard work. After the wedding, it became proof that I was finally willing to protect that security. I stopped seeing boundaries as cold and started seeing them for what they really are, a form of self-respect. I invited real friends out for quiet weekends. We cooked, sat by the water, talked past sunset, and nobody treated the house like leverage or status. It became what home should have been all along, a place where I didn't have to earn the right to relax. Professionally, I changed too. I got more selective, less willing to please difficult people just because they were used to being pleased. A few new clients came my way because someone admired how I handled pressure without losing composure. I never turned that night into a brand. I didn't want to, but I also stopped running from the lesson inside it. People notice. When a woman refuses to negotiate her dignity, sometimes they punish her for it. Sometimes they trust her more. In my case, both happened, and the second mattered more. Every now and then. Someone asks if I regret not smoothing things over sooner. What they usually mean is, do I regret letting my family experience consequences that were uncomfortable to watch? My answer is simple. No. I regret how long I believed peace required my silence. I regret how many times I confused being needed with being valued. I regret every moment I thought love meant making myself smaller, so other people could feel bigger. But I don't regret saying no. I don't regret leaving that ballroom. And I don't regret refusing to rescue people from a truth they created with their own hands. The biggest lesson I carried out of that time wasn't really about revenge. Even though people love calling stories like this revenge, real revenge sounds like plotting, punishment, strategy. What happened here was simpler and more useful. I stopped protecting harmful behavior from its natural consequences. I stopped offering my time, money, and peace to people who believed access to me was automatic. There's something deeply educational in that, especially for anyone raised to believe family must always come before self-respect. Family can be beautiful. Family can be healing, but blood doesn't turn exploitation into love, and tradition doesn't make disrespect noble. If someone only celebrates your success when they can benefit from it, that's not support. If someone punishes your boundaries, that's not closeness. And if keeping the peace requires you to hand over your dignity, your property, or your sense of self, then the peace was never real to begin with. The truth is, I didn't lose my family that night in Lake Geneva. I lost the illusion that they'd ever become the family I kept hoping for. What I gained instead was worth more. Clarity, freedom, and a life that only got stronger once I stopped handing pieces of it to people who never intended to protect them. So if you've ever been told that love means unlimited sacrifice, Let me say this clearly. It doesn't. Healthy love respects limits. Mature love doesn't confuse guilt with loyalty. And the people who truly belong in your life will never demand that you break yourself, just to prove that you care. Which character did you connect with most in this story? Was it Sophia, Judge Fontaine, or someone else who left the strongest impression? Leave a comment and let me know. What part of this story stayed with you the most?